Rathinam viddhi shariram rathamevatu buddhim tu sharatam viddhi manaha pragrahamevacha indriyani hayanahuhu vishayanteshu gocharan atmendriya manoyuktam bhoktetyahur manishinaha vijnana saratiryastu manaha pragrahavan naraha shodvanaha paramapnoti tadvishnoho paramam padam. A very significant declaration from Kathopanishad. One of the perennial questions, a timeless question that we all have is, who am I? A very profound question. Who am I? The word I embeds within it the deepest truth and the greatest error, depending on how it is used. And in our day-to-day usage, I embodies the primordial error and the misrepresentation and misconception of who we are. Who am I? The Gita gives us a very concrete and conclusive answer. Najayate mriyate va kadachin ayam bhutva bhavitavana bhuya ajo nityah shashvatoyam puranaha nahanyate hanyamane sharire ajaha nityaha shashvataha puranaha. I am the Atman. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am not the intellect. I am the Atman. Now, while it is not easy to comprehend Atman, the individual soul, it is also equally difficult to comprehend the word mind. The word mind is not easy at all to comprehend. Many a times, the word mind is associated with brain. It is also associated with the heart. Now, it seems there was this man who went to see a doctor for a brain scan. The doctor took the scan and declared, you know what? Your brain has two sides, the left side and the right side. Then the man promptly interrupted and said, what is so different? What is so new about it? The doctor responded, let me tell you what is new, what is something very unique, what is very interesting. On the right side of your brain, there is nothing left. And on the left side of the brain, there is nothing right. Mind, when it is associated with the brain, completely is misleading. Same is the case when it is associated with the heart. Brain, heart are all physical organs belonging to the physical body, the material domain, the gross material domain. Manas, mind, belongs to the subtle material domain. To understand the mind, we need to mind the mind. And we need to mind the mind. With the blessings of His Holiness Chinnajir Swami, we are all assembled here to discuss the topic, mind the mind. Mind the mind. The first word mind in the topic is a verb which means to take care of. And the second word in the topic, mind, the mind is a noun which refers to the faculty of manas. When we mind the Gita, we get to know the significance of minding the mind. And when we mind the mind, and when the mind is also mind, M-I-N-E-D, we no longer need to mind the mindless world. We become mindful. Incidentally, mindful comes with only one L. And mindful is not supposed to be the mind being full. The mind, when it is emptied, becomes mindful. And when we mind the mind and experience mindfulness, we also become steady-minded, even-minded, firm-minded. The topic, mind the mind, is mind-blowing, mind-boggling. Therefore, it is very important that you have to apply your mind to the topic, mind the mind, in order to get some peace of mind, P-E-A-C, not P-I-E-C. Some of you may think I've lost my mind. The point I'm trying to use the word mind several times is to basically demonstrate that the word mind, depending on the context, can mean several things. And in spite of us using the word mind so very frequently on a day-to-day basis, we still have very limited understanding of the word mind. Therefore, we need to understand how the Shastras in general and Gita in particular help us to unravel this mystery, to unravel this word called mind. Because Krishna himself declares in the Gita, Uddharer atmanatmanam na atmanam avashadayet. Atmaiva hyatmano bandhu atmaiva ripuratmanaha. Uddharer atmanatmanam. One can get elevated only by the means of one's mind. Na atmanam avashadayet. One also gets degraded by the means of one's own mind. Atmaiva hyatmana bandhu atmaiva ripuratmanaha. The mind is one's best friend. The same mind can also be one's worst enemy. Therefore, it becomes essential to mind the mind. Life mastery is all about mind mastery. And that is the reason why all our scriptures deal with the with mind to a large extent, and all sadhanas are about training the mind, controlling the mind, mastering the mind. The Gita helps us to understand who we are, and in that process understand the mind. Our existence primarily is two-dimensional. Our existence is primarily two-dimensional. There is a material dimension and there is a spiritual dimension. The material dimension can further be categorized, broken down into many other dimensions. Now we have a physical side, the body, the physical body, the gross body, which can be seen, perceived, which has all the sense organs. We also have the mental side, the mind, which is subtle body. And then we have the spiritual side. Both the physical body and the mental body, the mind, belong to the realm of matter, prakriti. Bhumirapo nalo vayuh kammano buddhirevacha ahankara iti yamme bhinnah prakriti rashtada. Everything that is material, insentient matter, comes from prakriti, which is the lower energy, the property that belongs to Bhagavan, Krishna. So the physical body, the sense organs, the indriyas, the jnanendriyas, the karmendriyas, and the mind, the subtle body, they are all products of prakriti. On the other hand, apareyam itaspanyam prakritim vidhi me param. Jiva bhutam mahabaho edam dharyate jagat. The other property of Bhagavan, his higher energy, is the Atman, Jiva Samuha, all the individual souls. The Atman is distinct and different from the body in which it indwells. That is why Kathopanishad gives us the analogy of a chariot. Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi. Consider the Atman, the indweller inside a body, as Rathinam, as the charioteer. This helps us to visualize. So when we visualize, it becomes a lot more clear to us. Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi. Shariram Rathamevatu. Consider the chariot, the Ratha, as the Sharira, the physical body, the gross physical body. Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi, Shariram Rathamevatu. Buddhim tu Sarathim Vidhi. Buddhi is intellect. Buddhim tu Sarathim Vidhi. The charioteer. Atmanam Rathinam. Atma is the master. He is the traveler sitting in the chariot. The Buddhi, intellect, which is distinct and different from the Atman, is the charioteer. Sharira, the physical body, is the Ratha, the charioteer. Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi, Shariram Rathamevatu, Buddhim tu Sharathim Vidhi, Manaha Pragrahamevacha. Pragraha, bridle that holds the horses. The mind, manas, the faculty of manas, can be compared to the bridle. Indriyani hayanahu, vishayan teshu gocharan. The horses are the sense organs. The sense organs are like the horses that are yoked to this chariot, that are pulling this chariot forward. Indriyani hayanahu, vishayan teshu gocharan. The paths on which the horses tread are the sense objects. Atmendriya manoyuktam bhoktetyahur manishinaha. The Atman, which is associated with this physical body, mind, and intellect, is the bhokta, is the experiencer, who is traveling in this physical body. The Atman keeps traveling in the journey of samsara from one life to the other. The Atman is moving on, acquiring different kinds of embodiments, one chariot after the other. And the Upanishad says, Vijnana Saratiryastu Manaha Pragrahavannaraha Sodvanaha Paramapnoti Tatvishnoho Paramam Padam. Vijnana Saratiryastu. When an intellect which is clear, which is able to control and master the mind, and when the mind is able to control and master the senses, Vijnana Saratiryastu Manaha Pragrahavannaraha Sodvanaha Paramapnoti Tatvishnoho Paramam Padam. Then the Atman, the traveler in this chariot, would definitely reach, once the hierarchy is got right, the senses, above the senses the mind, above the mind the intellect, above the intellect the Atman. Once the hierarchy is established properly, the chain of command is established, then the chariot can travel on the right path, the path leading all the way, Tat Vishnoho Paramam Padam. Now, for us, since we are in this modern world, chariots belong to the past. So we can possibly take the example of a smartphone. So ever since smartphones happened, only the phones have become smarter. The users, I'm not sure, have become smarter or not. Anyway, we call today's phones smartphones. We can use the analogy of a smartphone to understand this better. In a smartphone, We have the hardware. We have the software. So the software consists of firmware, the operating system, the various applications, all put together. Let's call it software. And then there is a user. The software is the intermediary between the user and the hardware. So taking the same analogy, the physical body is like the hardware. Manas is the software. The user is the Atman, each and every one of us. The Manas is the intermediary, it's an interface between the Atman and the hardware, which is the physical body. Just like in the phone, when there is a hardware problem, the solution is different. And when there is a software problem, the solution is so very different. The way we deal with hardware problems and software problems are so very different. Similarly, the way we have to deal with a problem with the body is so very different as to deal with the problem with the mind. Now, when we talk about mind, the mind, once again, comprises of four functional parts. Manaha, Chitta, Buddhi, Ahankara. Functionally, you can break down mind into four parts for us to understand it even better. Just like how when we say software, there is firmware, there is operating system, there are various applications. The mind, the manas is the sensory, the processor which processes all the sensory inputs and outputs. The sensory processing unit. It is a supervisor in the factory of life, supposedly supervising all the senses. Supposedly. Most of the time, the mind surrenders to the senses. The mind is supposed to be a good supervisor. The mind is a good supervisor, but a very bad decision maker. For decision making, we need the intellect, buddhi. Chitta is the memory bank, which stores all the impressions that come into the mind. All our karma vasanas are stored in chitta. And then the ahankara, the fourth functional part of mind. Ahankara, which is translated as ego, which arises due to the association, the misidentification of the Atman with the indwelling body. Ahankara masquerades as the pseudo-self. Many times when we say I, we are actually referring to the I, which is Ahankara, not the real I. Now, for us to understand mind, we need to necessarily bring a distance between us and the mind. What do I mean by that? At one level, the mind is inside us. At the other level, the mind is outside us. At one level, the mind is inside us. Now, when I'm speaking to you all, there is part of my mind which is speaking to me. Am I saying something very abstract? Am I making sense? Are people understanding? Maybe there is a part of mind inside you which is asking this question, what is all this stuff that's going on? It seems to be very complicated. From that point of view, the mind is inside us. At one level, the mind is inside us, constantly chatting, constantly talking to us. Many times we say our inner voice is talking to us. It's actually the voice of the mind. At one level, the mind is inside us, but at another level, the mind is outside us. Now, whether the mind is inside us or outside us depends on what is the reference point. If the reference point is the body, then the mind is inside us. If the reference point is the body, the physical body, the mind is inside us, and with that reference point, we tend to identify with the mind. When we say I, the I refers to the mind, because we tend to think everything inside us is us. Not necessary. When the reference point is the body, whatever inside the body, the mind, the thoughts, the feelings, and the emotions, we start to identify with them. But when the reference point is our authentic self, when we really consider our true identity, we are not the body. We are the Atman inside, the indwelling Atman inside. When the reference point is the Atman, for the Atman, the mind is outside. The mind is outside the Atman. Therefore, whatever is there in the mind, the content of the mind is not really mind. It is very important to make this distinction. When we typically operate in the world, we often look at the world with the mind. Not often. By design, we look at the world with the mind. The Gita says, one must not look at the world with the mind. One must operate in the world by looking at the mind, not looking with the mind. What is the difference between looking with the mind and looking at the mind? Looking with the mind means identifying with the mind, identifying with the content in the mind, identifying with the modes of the mind. The modes are gunas of the mind. Identifying with the moods which are caused by the modes. Identifying with the feelings, with the emotions. Everything that comes into the mind becomes me. It is like wearing a spectacle and looking at the world through the colors of the spectacle. The colors of the spectacle keeps changing. Looking with the mind is looking with a spectacle. The colors which keep changing quite often. And I look at the world which seems to be colored all the time. Depending on the mood of my mind, the world keeps changing all around. This is looking with the mind. Most often we operate in this world by looking with the mind. The Gita teaches us how to look at the world by looking at the mind. What is looking at the mind? Looking at the mind is to see the mind as outside of us, not to identify with it, not to identify with the emotions. Recognizing that the emotions are not reflection of my authentic nature. Emotions are just disturbances in the mind. The mind is an interface between the Atman and the body. It is like a window. The mind is like a window for the Atman to the outside world. What does the mind do? Shrotram chakshuh sparshanam cha rasanam ghranam cha adhisthaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. Krishna in the Gita says, the Atman which is dwelling, the indweller in the body, how does the Atman experience the world around? Experience the sense object. Shrotram chakshuh sparshanam cha rasanam ghranam cha adhisthaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. The mind acting like a window to the outside world, it integrates all the inputs coming from the sense organs. The sense organs by design are looking outward into this world. The sense organs bring stimuli from the sense objects. The stimuli from the external world come through the sense organs. And the mind integrates all of this and puts together a nice picture. Integrates all the sensory inputs, acting as an interface. And through this interface alone, the Atman experiences the world, the sense objects. Now, this mind, this window that integrates all the sensory inputs is not just an ordinary window, it's a very sophisticated window. It's so very sophisticated, we can relate it to a computer screen, which basically integrates inputs coming from various CCTV cameras. In a high-tech building, if there are strategically placed CCTV cameras, there is a central unit which brings all of the inputs together, integrates and presents in one screen. Mind is more sophisticated than that. It integrates all the sensory inputs. The only problem is, while it is displaying, it can display whatever it wants. It is not only a window, it also turns into a TV screen. Sometimes it can play horror movies. Sometimes it can play romantic movies. Sometimes it can play, suspense thrillers. Mind is a great storyteller. Depending on the nature of our vasanas, the mind can present this integrated view. It doesn't present a faithful display of the view of the world. That is why when I see the world and when you see the world, the way we process it is so very different. It all depends on the mind. It is not only a sophisticated computer screen which displays, it is also a sophisticated camera which records everything that is displayed. This is a problem because everything that comes in is faithfully recorded. Impressions created in the mind. The impressions that are formed in the mind start to become propositions. As the impressions become stronger and stronger, the mind's propositions become forceful and forceful. Shariram yadavapnoti yachapi utkramatishvaraha grihitvaitani samyati vayurgandha nivashayat. Krishna says, vayurgandha nivashayat. Just like how vayu, air, picks up various fragrances on the way, picks them up and keeps moving on. The mind keeps picking up impressions and keeps moving on. And it is these impressions, these vasanas that are faithfully stored, which are responsible for the nature of the body that we acquire from one lifetime to the other. What is faithfully stored, the vasanas, not only impact our actions in this very life, they also shape our destiny beyond this very life. The cycle of samsara is nothing but a cycle of vasanas. Karma vasanas driving desires, desires driving actions, actions once again resulting in accumulation of karma vasanas. This is a cycle which is vicious in nature, keeps going on and on and on and on. Now this mind, which is also a sophisticated camera, should also function ideally as a mirror. Only then it can reflect the Atman, our nature. That is why the mind can also be a friend if it reflects our nature. Unfortunately, it only faintly, in some cases, reflects. Most of the time, it reflects what the world, the way the world sees us and not our authentic self. The mind often distorts the picture of who we are. That is the reason why it is very difficult for us to recognize and realize that we are the Atman, the individual souls, the indwellers within the body. The mirror, the mirror function of the mind often does not work because of the layers of dirt, layers of impurities on the mind, on this mirror. Now, when a mirror has layers and layers of dust, what do you expect the mirror to do? Therefore, the reflection that it does, once again, is a function of the nature of the dirt accumulated over it. Therefore, the mind magnifies, mutates every problem. Every situation becomes a problem. The world gives us work, the mind transforms into workload. Every situation becomes a problem. The mind mutates it. Every situation becomes a problem. It magnifies the problem. It not only mutates and magnifies the problem, it also instigates, impels us to succumb to our own desires and vasanas. Not only it instigates and incites us to succumb to our vasanas, it also keeps nagging us all the time, complaining continuously. There is this incessant chatter going on in the mind. And therefore, it keeps distracting us, deviating us, keeping us always in a deluded state. That is why it is mind. Mutating, magnifying, inciting, igniting, impelling, nagging, distracting, deviating. There we get the word mind. It is therefore necessary to understand the functioning of this mind. Mind the mind. How do we take care of the mind? We need to know that, just like taking the example of the smartphone, the mind also has default settings. Now, we are all more or less used, especially the new generation, they're all used to the smartphones, and we all know what happens if somebody uses a smartphone for a long time and then we start to use it. Everything in the smartphone, there are default settings, depending on not only default settings, the user settings. At every level, every application, there are. And therefore, if we start using that smartphone, there are decisions taken on behalf of us by the phone. Famous is autocorrect. It does everything wrong. It's supposed to be autocorrect. It turns out to be auto wrong. And all these default settings, if we do not intervene, will take us in a particular direction. Same thing happens with the mind as well. The mind comes with certain default settings, the mental makeup. When we take birth, we already come into this birth with a mental makeup. Our prarabdha, set of vasanas, are ready to start functioning, to start executing. Rajas tamas chavibhuya sattvam bhavati bharata. Rajas sattvam tamaschaiva tamas sattvam rajas tatha, Krishna says. The moods of the mind keeps changing depending on whether sattva is dominating, whether it is tamas dominating or rajas dominating. Our default settings are based on the mental makeup. What kind of gunas? If the default setting is tamasic in nature, our mental mood is always tamasic. Lethargic all the time, not able to take decisions, even becoming violent, violently driven. If the default setting is rajasic, we are always indiscriminate in our actions, driven by cravings, passion, always agitated. If the default setting is sattvic in nature, the mode of goodness, there is clarity, and that can stimulate, that can introspection, that can help in assimilating knowledge. But then it is important to recognize the default setting, to know the default settings. Just like how in the browser that we use, if a particular home page is set, every time we open the browser, it goes to the particular home page. Now, all of us have our own home pages. Now, some have a home page all about food, different types of food. Some have a home page which is all about money. The stock market, bar graph here, other graph here, all filled with what's going on in the world of money. Some have a home page which is all about gold. Some has a home page which is all about books. This is a reflection of our own mental makeup, the default settings, depending on the dominance of sattva, rajas, or tamas. If we do not change these default settings, the mind is programmed to execute actions in certain way. We are no different to programmed machines. Our vasanas, our habit patterns, our default settings take charge of our lives. And before we realize, we end up leading life not taking any decisions. We think we are taking decisions, but we are only unconsciously taking decisions. Our vasanas, our mind is taking all the decisions for us. It is therefore important to recognize the default settings. Now, some of these default settings could be desirable, if they are sattvic in nature. Some of these default settings, most of these default settings are undesirable. So we need to first recognize these default settings of the mind. Once we recognize the default settings of the mind, then we need to then analyze what are desirable, what are undesirable. And once we identify the undesirable default settings, then we need to come up with a process to change. Just like how in our own smartphones, if we are irritated by the autocorrect function, we have to go to the settings and change. Most often what happens with these default settings, just like with the smartphone, when we get, somebody has used the smartphone for, let's say, for a year, and then it's given to us. The body is also like that. We have acquired this body in this lifetime, a set of vasanas, a package comes with us as we take birth. These are our default settings. Now, with these default settings, there can be two approaches: resentment or surrender. Again, taking the analogy of smartphone, the smartphone comes to us already used. So every app has its own default settings based on user preferences. It's already there. We can just take the position of resentment, get irritated, saying, what's happening? Why this? Whenever I type in, it's going somewhere. I want to go to one site, it takes me to some other site. It happens to all of us. Now, on the other hand, we can give up and surrender. Just let it be. Both these approaches are not going to have any use. Same is the case with our own. We need to identify the process. What do we do in the case of a smartphone? We have to necessarily learn how to go into the settings and do the reconfiguration. And also we learn that if we repeatedly do a task, if I keep going to the same website every day, after few tries, when I type the first two letters of the website, Times of India, TI, I type, if I've been browsing Times of India every day, the first thing that comes to me is Times of India. So I can also reprogram. I can also change the default settings and put in the settings of my choice. There is a process involved. Now, let's take another analogy. Now, if the flooring of the bathroom is inclined, the sink is on the one side, but unfortunately the flooring is inclined towards the other side. And when you pour water, the water is never going to go to the sink because it's always going to flow down the inclination. What can we do? We need to repeatedly use a brush to keep pushing the water so that it can go to the sink. That's what Krishna says. Yato yato nischarati manaschanchalamasthiram tatastato niyamyaitada atmanyeva vasham naye. He says. Yato yato nischarati. Yato yato nischarati manaschanchalamasthiram. Arjuna. Yato yato nischarati manaschanchalamasthiram. This mind is not steady, very unsteady. It is restless all the time. The only way to deal with this restless mind is to constantly bring it back to do what you want it to do. Tatastato niyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham naye. One has to bring it, control it, and bring it back and keep repeatedly. Changing our habit is not very easy. If we need to repeatedly keep doing the same thing again and again and again. Train the mind to behave in certain way. Otherwise, the mind, which is restless, which is unsteady, keeps going back to its own program. The program of the vasanas, which are already there. Yato yato nischarati tatas chanchalamasthiram. The mind keeps wandering all the time, Krishna says. It keeps wandering. Why? Seeking imagined pleasures for sense gratification all the time. Imagined pleasures. Because the mind is always imagining pleasures in everything. Where there is no pleasure, it is imagining, because there is no pleasure in any of the sense objects. But it imagines pleasures and it keeps wandering, seeking sense gratification, immediate gratification. It wants immediate gratification all the time. It keeps wandering, it keeps pandering to the desires. It keeps pandering to the stimuli coming from the world. Therefore, Krishna says the mind should not be wandering and pandering, it should be wondering and pondering. It should be wondering. The mind should be made to wonder at this world. Krishna's world is wonderful. Krishna is wonderful. His world is wonderful. The mind needs to wonder in awe of Bhagavan, the creator and this creation, and it needs to ponder. It needs to ask all the right questions. And when this happens, with great effort, one can keep repeatedly. This is what Krishna calls abhyasa. Repeatedly keep doing the right thing. Keep the mind under control all the time. It's like taking the example of this inclined flooring in the bathroom. Repeatedly pushing the water back into the sink with a brush. But then how long can we keep doing this? That is what Krishna says. Ragadvesha vyuktaistu vishayan indriyais charan atmavashye vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. He says. At some point, we have to take a decision and deconstruct the wall. The structure of the wall, the inclination has to be changed. So, Ragadvesha vyuktaistu vishayan indriyais charan. Vishayan indriya. After all, we are all not ascetics. We have to deal with the world. We have to engage with this world. We cannot escape. We walk out and we are bombarded with stimuli in this world. How much we can keep controlling ourselves? Directing, going. No, it's not possible. If I'm driving to the office and it so happens that there is a bar next to my office, I cannot be running away all the time. I need to eventually have the courage to drive through and not be in any way impacted whatsoever. So, Vishayan Indriyais Charan, even when operating in this world, engaging with the world of matter, Vishayaha, the Shastras talk about, when we talk about the sense objects, Shastras classify them into two categories, Padartha, Vishaya. Padartha, every sense object can only be a Padartha. Padartha means I can engage with it, I can deal with it, I can experience it as well. But the moment I get attached to it, it becomes Vishaya. If I am not careful enough, a Padartha can become a Vishaya. No, that's why Krishna calls Vyayato Vishayan Pumsaha Sangasteshu Upajayate Sanghat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krudo Vijayate Krodad Bhavati Sammoha Srudit Brimsat Buddhinashaha, he says. Therefore, it is very, very important. How do we conquer the senses, and beyond conquering the senses, not suppressing, mastering the senses? Krishna gives the formula here. Raga dvesha vyuktaistu vishayan indriyais charan. Raga dvesha vyuktaistu. Overcoming likes and dislikes. Raga dvesha. Aversion and attachment. Attachment and aversion. Avoiding attachment and aversion. Ragadvesha vyuktaistu vishayan indriyais charan atmavashyer vidheyatma. Atmavashyer. No, this is where getting the hierarchy right. We need to get the hierarchy right. The Atman needs to be able to control the intellect. The intellect needs to control the mind. The mind needs to control the senses. If this hierarchy, if the chain of command is right, then one is Atmavashyer. Atmavasha, getting the senses are completely under control. Vidheyatma. Vidheyatma, one who has mastered the mind. Prasadam adhigacchati, Krishna says. Prasada, what a beautiful word. Prasada can mean several things. Prasada is tranquility. Prasada is calmness. Prasada is purity. Prasada is serenity. Serenity. Serenity is to change what can be changed. To accept the changeless. unchangeable, and the wisdom to know the difference. Prasadam adhigacchati. Krishna says, one attains tranquility, serenity, purity of the mind. Prasade sarvadukkhanam hanir asyopajayate. Prasanna chetoso hyashu buddhir paryavatishthate. He says, what happens when one is tranquil minded, when there is serenity in the mind, when there is purity in the mind? Sarvadukkhanam hanir asyopajayate. All the sufferings come to an end, Krishna says. There will be no more sufferings, because pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. When once there is purity of mind, all sufferings come to an end. Prasanna chetaso hyashu buddhir paryavatishthate, he says. For the tranquil minded, the mind becomes steady. One becomes steady-minded, firm-minded, even-minded. That's when the mind becomes firm. One conquers the mind. One becomes the master of the mind. Now, purification is a very important process. Our Shastras constantly keep teaching purification and willpower. Today, the term purification may sound very old-fashioned, very orthodox. When we say, I want to purify myself, they sound very, but important to understand the relationship, the connection between willpower and purification. Willpower is the ability to choose our desires, to persist with healthy desires and desist with unhealthy desires. Purification is about strengthening our healthy desires and weakening our unhealthy desires. That is purification. With purification of the mind, our unhealthy desires are weakened. So with purification, our willpower gets enhanced. How? When purification happens, our healthy desires are strengthened. When the healthy desires are strengthened, they can easily manifest into actions. Therefore, our willpower gets enhanced. With purification, also the need for higher willpower also goes. Because when our unhealthy desires are weakened, then we don't need that much of a willpower to fight against the unhealthy desires. That is why Krishna talks about prasanna chetaso hyashu buddhihi paryavatishthate. Buddhihi paryavatishthate. The buddhi, the intellect becomes steady, the mind becomes steady. The hierarchy is got right. So now, knowing this mind, the nature of this mind, what is the formula? When we say mind, the mind, when Krishna says, Uddhared atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadayet, atmaiva hyatmano bandhu atmaiva ripuratmanaha. Elevate yourself with your mind. If you do not elevate yourself with the mind will degrade you, destroy you. Because the mind can be a conquered mind, a mastered mind is a great friend. A mind that conquers you will be a worst enemy. Now, therefore, how do we mind the mind? What is the formula for minding the mind? The answer is mind. M-I-N-D. The first M is meditate. Now, the moment we say meditate, immediately we all start thinking about how complex meditation is all about. This seems to be an extraordinary thing that one has to really put a lot of effort. There are organizations today minting money, selling meditation, and packaging meditation as something which is extraordinary. We don't realize that we are all naturally good meditators, whether we realize it or not. We are all naturally good meditators. Day in and day out, we are meditating on our problems. Aren't we very focused, worrying all the time? Deep meditation, all the time. Worrying is our second nature. And worrying is just another form of meditation. It's just that we are focused on an imagined problem. Most of the time, it is imagined problem, a problem that not even has happened. So meditation is all about just slightly changing the direction of our focus. Instead of focusing on the problem, divert the attention to the problem solver who is waiting for us. Krishna is waiting to solve our problems, waiting for us to delegate it to him. In a way, meditation is delegation. We do not need to be overwhelmed when we talk about delegation, meditation. Now, while saying is easy, of course, it requires a lot of effort, but how do we empower ourselves to shift our focus to Krishna? That is where comes the next important formula, technique. I in the mind, I, illumination. The mind needs to be illumined by the Shastras. Shastra Jnana is fundamental. The Gita illumines our mind. It illumines the mind and kindles our love for Krishna. And when this love for Krishna is kindled, meditation will happen automatically. We all know when we love something, when we like something, we are focused. So when we love Krishna, we don't need extra effort to meditate on Krishna. Vishaya Dhyana is very natural to us. Krishna Dhyana takes some time, but we need illumination of the Shastras. And then we also need to nourish the mind constantly. Always feed. The input into the mind should always be very nourishing. That is why Shravana is so very important. Always nourish the mind with lofty thoughts, with noble thoughts, and also nourish and neaten. What is neatening? Organizing. We need to organize the mind. Bring Krishna as the priority in our mind. And once Krishna walks in and he becomes the priority, it becomes very easy to organize all our desires. And D of mind, very simple. Do. Keep doing. Do. Practice, 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 practice. There are no shortcuts. We need to necessarily practice. Keep doing. Abhyasa, sadhana. And more importantly, we need to do one very important thing. We need to take the shelter of Krishna. Instead of taking the shelter of the world, when we take shelter of Krishna, everything else will fall in place. Samashritaye patapallava plavam ahat padam punya yasho murare baham mudir vatsapadam param padam 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 yad vipadam natesha. Srimad Bhagavatam beautifully gives us the answer. How do we cross over this ocean of samsara? How do we fulfill the supreme purpose of our life and living? Samashrita ye padapallava plavam mahat padam punya yasho murare bhavam budir vatsapadam param padam 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 yat vipadam natesham. What a beautiful shloka it is. Vatsa padam. Vatsa is a calf. For the one who has surrendered one's mind to Krishna, the Murari, the Mukunda, to the lotus feet of Krishna, who is the shelter of this cosmos. For the one who has surrendered one's mind to Krishna, it seems the ocean of samsara becomes like water contained in the calf's hoof print. Crossing over the water contained in the calf's hoof print is so very effortless. For the one who has surrendered one's mind to Krishna, the mind is always fixed on the ultimate goal, which is Paramapada Vaikuntha. Bhavam budir vatsapadam param padam 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 yat vipadam natesham. Padam padam yat vipadam. One realizes every step in this world of samsara is filled with adversities. Therefore, the only city without any adversity is Krishna's city, Sri Vaikuntha. The mind, when it is attached to Krishna with the only goal of attaining his lotus feet, will enable one to cross over this ocean of samsara so very effortlessly. Therefore, going back to where we started with the Kathopanishad declaration, we need to just add one important element there. Vijnana saratiryastu manaha pragrahavannaraha chodvanaha paramapnoti tadvishnoho paramam padam. We started off with this beautiful analogy of the chariot. Atmanam ratinam vidhi. Atma is the traveler. Shariram ratamevatu. This body is like the chariot. Buddhim tu saratim vidhi. Buddhi is sarati. Manaha pragrahamevacha. Mana is the bridle. Indriyadi hayanaguhu. All the horses, the senses are the horses. And the paths on which they tread are the sense objects. Now, the Upanishad says, Vijnana saratiryastu manaha pragrahavannaraha. One who has the conquered intellect. Now, how do we ensure that we get not only the direction right, we reach our ultimate destination? It's not just Vijnana saratiryastu manaha pragrahavannaraha. The Vijnana, the intellect has to be surrendered. Therefore, we need Krishna. The Partha Sarathi has to become our Sarathi. When the Partha Sarathi becomes the Sarathi of our Ratha, the Ratha of the body, not only the Ratha of the body, our Ratha and our Manoratha. He is the one who also leads us, and he is the one who guides us on this path. Tad Vishnoho yat paramam padam. Attaining Paramapada Vaikuntha becomes effortless because he is the one who has now taken over the responsibility. Responsibility is not with us anymore. We can peacefully enjoy the ride. Peacefully enjoy the ride and experience bliss in this very life as we travel in this very body until the time comes when he will guide us all the way to his abode. Therefore, the Gita gives us a beautiful framework, a framework to recognize and understand our multi-dimensional existence, the material and the spiritual. And within the material realm, understand the distinctions between our physical body, our senses, our mind, our intellect. Unravel the mysteries of the mind. Know the mind, train the mind, and master the mind eventually, and hand over the mind to Krishna so that we can successfully fulfill our life's mission and purpose. I take this opportunity to thank Jet USA for giving this forum to address you all. Eternally indebted to His Holiness Janajir Swami, who is a great source of inspiration for all of us. I'm sure many of you would have, while listening to Mind the Mind, some amount of mining would definitely have happened. Feel free to post questions now, and also can stay connected through the organizers. I would conclude here and hand it over back to Aparnaji for taking this forward. Sarvam Sri Krishna Arpanamastu.
Jai Sriman Narayana. Thank you, Sudarshanji, for very lucidly talking about mind the mind. We all know how powerful our mind is, what we record and what we see. Hence, I felt the best thing is to have the mind like a mirror, just like how you said, which reflects your true self. When you take care of your mind, the manas, and be mindful of it. And how will that happen? It's through understanding the Gita. Mind should always be wondering and pondering and not wandering and pandering, as you said. This also is through continuous nourishment and practice. It can be achieved by putting the knowledge into practice. Just having the knowledge is not enough, because when the real situation occurs, you are totally lost. If you have the knowledge, gain the knowledge, and practice it every moment of your life. And that is the very reason our Acharya, His Holiness Sri Chinnajaya Swamiji, has guided us with a beautiful program, personality development program. It's called Prajna. It's from a tender age of 5 and above. It's not just for children. We always think children don't know anything, but children are open-minded. They learn everything that is given to them. So it's the parents' responsibility to learn and guide the children too. And that is what Chinnajaya Swamiji has given us, that program, Prajna. And in Prajna, I think for the past 2 years, we've started a program called Life Management in Gita. Few lessons from Bhagavad Gita. I know it's vast. Every time you listen to it, you find something new that you take it from it and try to practice it. But Swamiji has come up with few lessons from each chapter of Bhagavad Gita and put them into a program called Life Management in Gita. So how you manage your life by learning from those lessons, because we all say Gita is a life learning, it's a life lesson teaching book for us, right? So that program is there, and adults also have the opportunity to take part in that. And we have a crash course offered for adults and college-going students. So for more information, anybody interested can contact info@jetusa.org or Prajna for me and get more information on it. Again, one last thing before we go to the question and answers. Surrender to Krishna and he will become the sailor and make us sail the ship smoothly. No worries. Learn, nourish yourself and practice. Krishna will take care of us. Jai Sriman Narayana. And over to Sri Gauriji for question and answers. And Sudarshan ji will answer those. And depending on the time, Sudarshan ji, please feel free to tell us when we can stop. But we are thinking about 15 to 20 minutes is okay for question and answers? Okay.
That should be.
All right. Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, Akka. Sudarshanji, the first question goes, we always hear that you are what you eat. Then how come we see some people who eat everything they see being nice and serving the needy, compared to few people who eat sattvic food but are outrageous, greedy, and do not walk the talk?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. That's why I said we are not only product of our habits of this life, we are product of habits of several lifetimes before. So if I have accumulated vasanas coming into this life, which are going to be rajasic and tamasic, it's going to take time for me by even practicing sattvic food habits in this current life to overcome the power of rajas and tamas. The process is going to take time. So yes, there could be cases where somebody is practicing with all sincerity, ahara niyama. No, the results may not be evident immediately, because for sure, as Shastras declare, ahara shuddhi, sattva shuddhi is definitely, it's going to have an impact, but it may take some time. There could be a lag, in terms between the practices and the outcomes. Whereas on the other hand, one could have been carrying some very highly sattvic vasanas coming into this lifetime, and because of some papa karmas, could possibly be engaged in non-sattvic endeavors in this current life. And we could see those streaks of goodness, those streaks of sattva in them too. But then the outcome of their current rajasic and tamasic activities are going to soon catch up. They're going to catch up with them soon, and it's going to be, not so good for them. So the theory of karma is inescapable, and it is very important that whatever we do, we need to always keep cultivating sattva, so that eventually we can overcome rajas and tamas. That's a short answer to the question. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Sudarshanji. The next question is from Gauri Kumarji. While we are listening and trying to understand to this talk, is the mind which is listening and acting?
Yes, as I said, the mind is a tool, is an interface between the Atman and the world. So therefore, when we say listening, the mind obviously is collecting the inputs coming through the indriya of the ears, the shotrendriyas, and it is presenting to the Atman. So we need the mind to listen, but we need a clear mind, a pure mind, so that instead of hearing, we can actually listen. A mind which will not filter based on the colors of vasanas it has accumulated. That is the reason why sometimes, even if we give full attention of the mind, we possibly may not comprehend the message that is being given, because there is filtering done by the mind. So the process of purification of the mind is also very important, to also listen effectively and comprehend the messages of the Shastras. So yes, the mind definitely is the interface for us to listen. And all the more reason why we need to mind the mind. Does that answer your question?
Gauri Kumarji is on the call. So.
Yeah, Jai Shri Narayana Sudarshanji. Actually, there is a follow-up question for it. So if it is the mind which is listening to all these things, right, and we are gaining the knowledge through this mind itself. You provided, you have given a wonderful analogy that about the default settings of the mind. So the next question, the follow-up for the previous question is so do we change the default settings of the mind using the same mind with those default settings? So it's you have the same thing. I don't know.
Yes.
So you have to change something, and you have to change something. You have to use the same thing to change that itself. So it's an infinite loop kind of a thing. That
you use your will, the power of will, which belongs to the Atman. The will is exercised to change the default settings. But for the will to be effectively utilized, we need sattva in the mind. So therefore, what happens is, the mind that can have an admixture of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Not all the time it is sattvic, or not all the time it is rajasic, not all the time it's tamasic. So we have to use the opportunity when sattva is slightly dominant to exercise our will and get an action executed. And this will leave a sattvic impression. And more, essentially, as we keep doing this over a period of time, sattva predominates. And when sattva predominates, exercising our will becomes easier. That is why I talked about purification and will going hand in hand. The purification process is weakening our unhealthy desires. The more we weaken our unhealthy desires, the more we promote our healthy desires, the easier for us to execute our will and change the default settings. So it is a process where we use the will, we use the mind, and we work together in the process.
Yeah, I'm still not clear here. So it's like this is the mind which is listening. Okay. So let's say I will be listen to this talk, and there is one point which it says, "Hey, surrender to Krishna." It is the Krishna which has to guide us all, right? The mind has listened to this, but then the mind has its own default settings, but it won't work on this, right? It won't work on this. So what is that which is actually changing this or making this to divert is something
Yes.
I could not get it. Yeah.
So the mind, as you rightly say, because of the default settings, the mind overnight is not going to change. As I said, you need to start changing the settings. So surrendering to Krishna, when we start getting exposed to the knowledge, when the mind starts getting the illumination of the Shastras, there are sattvic impressions that are going to be made in the mind. Over a period of time, we start rewriting the code in the mind. The default settings are changed. The settings are changed, from unhealthy to healthy. So it is a process that we need to keep working on. And that is the reason why the practice part of it comes. It is not listening once saying we need to surrender to Krishna, immediately the mind will surrender to Krishna. This is a constant process where initially an effort is required, but over a period of time, as this healthy desire, this healthy impression gets stronger and stronger and stronger, then we will be able to overcome our default settings and write our own new settings. So it is definitely not an overnight process, but it is that is the reason why all the sadhanas, right from karma yoga to jnana yoga to bhakti yoga, all the sadhanas are essentially about looking at this mind which comes with its own set of vasanas, which are the default settings, and looking at how do I bring in reprogram it? How do I train it to do certain things right? And in the process of training it, eventually, how do I conquer it and exercise my willpower and take me to the right direction? So this process is something which is incremental in nature. As long as we are at it, we will see incremental improvements happening over a period of time.
Thank you, Sudarshan.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for that question. The next question is from Anandji. Do we have to go beyond all three gunas, and why? Is it enough to focus on attaining the sattvic nature?
Good question. Definitely cultivating sattva is fundamental for spiritual progress, but sattva also is binding. This is we use this analogy of gold fetters. Sattva also binds us, just like how whether we in a prison made of gold doesn't matter. The prison is a prison. So sattva also is binding in nature, and that is why we not only overcome rajas and tamas, we need to transcend sattva as well, because sattva binds us to this world thinking happiness. Sattvam sukhe sanjayati, Krishna says. Sattvam sukha. Because sattva gives us happiness, it binds us to the world thinking that this world is the source of happiness. So therefore, we need to transcend sattva as well. Moksha is attaining the state of Shuddha Sattva. The Samsara is Mishra Sattva. Even the most sattvic of people have Rajas and Tamas, tinges of Rajas and Tamas. It's just a question of the proportion. One can be highly sattvic, but still there is an admixture of Rajas and Tamas. In the state of Moksha, Paramapada, it is a state of Shuddha Sattva. So therefore, eventually we have to transcend Sattva as well.
The next question is from Hariji. How do I overcome desires, getting senses under control, pure tranquility, mind, willpower? How do I bring Krishna? What are the practical solutions? Everything discussed, I understand and agree, but the big question is how?
Okay. I did briefly touch upon how. Let me give you a simple way to do it. Krishna in the Gita talks about two important things. One is what is called Indriya Nigraha, the other is Mano Nigraha. Indriya Nigraha means building fences around us. The whole issue with the mind is whenever a stimuli bombards the mind, or whenever a stimuli or a desire arises even within, automatically the mind starts processing it. So one of the things that need to be done is to ensure that we fence the mind, at least take efforts to prevent unwanted stimuli getting processed, reaching the mind and getting processed. So Krishna gives this example of a tortoise, where the tortoise kind of withdraws itself into the shell. So one practice that we can put in place is avoid things which are avoidable. Indriya Nigraha, not get exposed to unwanted. If our willpower is not strong, there is no point in testing ourselves and putting ourselves to a testing situation. So fencing the mind. This is definitely one practice that we can all take home. The other is Mano Nigraha. One step going forward, any stimuli that comes in, any sense object that reaches inside the mind, immediately it results in a thought pattern. And just like how in an ocean, before the waves, there are ripples. Now, the ripple slowly transforms into a mighty wave and maybe eventually a tsunami only when it is aided by winds. Similarly, every thought that comes into the mind, whenever a sense object bombards the mind, when a stimuli comes in, when a desire arises, it essentially becomes a thought pattern there. Every thought starts off very feeble. It's like a small ripple. Only if it is fanned, the ripple grows into a mighty wave. Fanning in the mind is giving all attention to the mind. So the moment a thought occurs, we can start questioning, exercising whatever little willpower we have. Should I give attention to it or not give attention to it? Is it healthy or not healthy? Mano Nigraha is all about ensuring that the ripple-like thoughts do not become tsunamis in the mind. This practice takes over a period of time, helps us to use our will and control the mind, and thereby ensure that we are not agitated, we do not become overtly anxious. And when that happens, the third, which is the nididhyasana, can happen. When there is the practice of Indriya Nigraha, where we build fences around the mind, and Mano Nigraha, where we manage our thoughts and our desires, then there can be nididhyasana, where with a little bit of a calm, when there is a little bit of a calm, whatever knowledge we receive can get assimilated. If the mind is filled with too many things, whatever goes in terms of knowledge, whatever we listen, whatever we read, may not get assimilated. Nididhyasana is assimilation of knowledge and ability to contemplate, ability to introspect. That is when the knowledge that is assimilated starts to help us. So when this happens, then we would be able to divert and focus and bring Krishna into the scheme of things. And when he comes into the scheme of things, magic happens. Does that answer your question?
There was one follow-up question to that is, born in the US, I do not know Shastras. Sometimes I do not believe in God. So is it that if we do not surrender to Krishna, we are lost?
If we do not surrender to Krishna, we are definitely, when you say we are lost, the question here is, if we do not have the knowledge of the Shastras, we do not have answer to the questions as to, why am I here? What is the purpose of this life? Is there something beyond life and death? So therefore, without Shastras, without surrendering to Krishna, one would continue to be in the cycle of samsara. And there is no exit out of it. And the exit is possible only when we have the help of the Shastra and the Shastra given Krishna. That's a short answer to the question, but we can possibly, there's a very interesting topic which we can discuss at length. The importance of Shastra and the importance of Shastra Jnana and what is the purpose of life. But that's a short answer to the question.